Alright, welcome back to another web development video where I show you how to create modern websites using HTML5, CSS3, and a little bit of JavaScript. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this full bleed header that has this overlay here. This is sort of a common style that I'm seeing with a lot of landing page templates. So this is a nice opening for a landing page, a one-page website. Sort of sets the mood for whatever the company is or whatever the project is. There's a little bit of text here. There's a button that gets you going to wherever, either down the page or to another page. And then there's a little bit of a menu up here with a name, just a simple type name up here. So what we're going to do, we're going to use this as a template, but I'm going to show you how to do that here in Codepen, and you can find where this is in the show notes. So if you look down in the description, you'll be able to find a link to this code. The first thing we're going to do is we need to develop the larger container. And so we're going to just call that a header, and I'm just going to call this the masthead. That's just what I'm accustomed to using. And I'm going to also have what's called a masthead inner, and what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to place this using Flexbox. So I'll be able to sort of center this in the page. And then we're also going to have our navigation. So we need that. We need a navigation element. And then we need this inner text element as well. So we're actually going to put the photo, we're going to put that on the masthead. And then for the masthead inner, we might use that to make sure that we set a maximum width for all this internal information here. So I think that's the way I'm going to go do this. I haven't built this for this project, so I'm sort of winging it here. But I have built these before, so we'll just say nav, and then we'll just call this main nav, just main nav. And then inside the main nav, we're going to have the site title, and that's going to be like an H1, and we'll call it maxi texture. And let's actually do it this way. Yeah, we can do it this way. Okay. And then we're going to have a UL element and then some LIs. And so the first one, home, about, work, services, pages, blog. And then I'll just put a contact, so we won't worry about all those other ones. Okay, so this is going to be our top nav element, and then we'll just call each of these a top nav link. And we are going to make sure that each of these is an A element. So these are going to be actual links. We'll just put them like that for now. You would obviously put where they go to. You know, this would be like that. But the rest of these will be about or work or services. So whether you use an anchor link to go down the page, or you use a link to go to another page, you would just put that here in the href. And so we have our site title, we have our nav. This is going to be our main nav element. And then also inside the masthead inner, so we'll say 1, 2. We're going to have We'll just call it an article element, and we're going to call that masthead text. And then inside that we're going to have an h2, and we'll say masthead text headline. And we're going to call that precise concept design for stylish living. So we don't really need that. And we'll deal with that in just a moment. We don't need it to be capitalized necessarily in the code, because we can do that with the CSS. So then we'll have an h3, and that's going to be the same thing, except that's going to be a sub headline, and it's going to be here. We could also use a p element if we wanted to do a p element, but using your heading elements is going to allow you to section things out, so it sort of makes them important. We could just as easily do a p here, so you can see that that looks a little bit more like what we're trying to get. But when you're thinking about a web crawler coming and crawling this page, is that an important element for you to be able to put out to them and say, hey, these are like the most important words on the page? I would say maybe, and maybe not. We'll just leave it as a P, and then after that we'll have we'll say that this button is going to go down the page, so we'll say and we'll have a button there, an actual button. Normally when you use buttons, if it goes to off of your website, or it goes to another page, or it opens a different view, then you would use an anchor link. But if you're doing something like opening a pop-up, moving something down the page, click it and something happens right in front of you without really leaving the page, normally that's a place for a button. This one doesn't do anything right now. It just is there, and so we're going to say get started as well, and then when you click that button, if it did something, you would do something with that button. So what else? I think that's what we have right now. So this is the bones of what we have here, is the bones for what you're seeing here. Now we need to go off and we need to find an image. I don't have an image readily available, so let's just say architecture, and we'll just choose something appropriate. Okay, how about this one? And I'm going to get this right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that in. I'm not actually going to download the photo and do all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to pull it in through the CSS. So we'll say masthead, and we'll say background, and background image is going to be equal to URL of sorry, that's a little early. And so we have our image here. So to get that through a URL, you could use source.unsplash.com. If you go to that website, you'll see that you can use you can embed images as sort of a real low-level API for Unsplash, and then you just take whatever the image that you want. It has a little unique identifier here, and then you take that unique identifier and you put it here. You can also use explicit sizes for the image. So if you want to make sure that it's a specific size, this is a normal HD output 1600 by 900. And then this is only this size because we're not establishing what is the height of Masthead. So the height of Masthead is only the content inside of it, so this is just a background image here. But let's finish it out. So we need to say the size is cover, and we need to say the position is center, and we need to say, I like to just do repeat, no repeat, just so that it doesn't try to repeat on a really large screen, but it just sort of zooms in. And I think that's all that we need right now for this. We are going to put a little bit of an overlay on it, but we need to sort of deal with the text here. So we're going to go into site title. And we're going to say color is equal to white. So we get our white up here. Let's just go ahead and use, use a specific font. So in Codepen, if you go down to your assets panel, down here at the bottom, it normally comes up with the colors, and you can look at files you've uploaded and stuff like that. But there are all kinds of things. There are icons, and there are different patterns, and unsplash photos you can look through. So I could have done that here. And then there are also some sort of common fonts here, and I'm just going to bring these in through the CSS. So when we do that, we import Roboto. It's 400, 400 italic, and then 700. So you can actually add on to that if you wanted to. And then you can also copy the font family link. So I'm just going to say body. So I just want it all to be Roboto. So we're just going to do it like that. And then now all of our text is Roboto. I think it might be appropriate to do this. We'll see. Maybe it's not. So we're just going to style our navigation here. So we go to our top nav and copy that. And we come down here. I'm just going to mark it as navigation. That's the logo or the site title. So for the top nav, we're going to say display of flex, and then that brings all of our elements that are in the top nav, brings them side by side to each other. So it really is that easy. We need to style some of these other elements. So list style is equal to none. That gets rid of the should get rid of our dots. There we go. And we'll say padding of 0 and margin of 0. So the browser automatically puts some padding and margin here. So I just want to sort of zero that out. And we are going to look at our top nav links. I'll just copy that. And I want them to be white also. So we say color of white. Oh, sorry. It has to be the top nav link A. So we were styling the list item. We weren't styling the anchor tag inside that. So we just had to drop down and make sure that we're styling that anchor tag. And we'll say text decoration of none. And we need to make sure that we capitalize these. So the way that we do that is we say text transform of uppercase. And so that pushes them all to uppercase, you can see. And we're going to spread these out a little bit. There's a couple of things that we can do here. The way that I normally would do this kind of thing is I would say, because this is going to be right aligned over here, I would say margin to the left of one rem, and then that puts a one rem margin to the left of each of these, and it gives us the spacing mostly that we're looking for. I'll also show you how to do that using Flexbox. So we'll try both. Okay. Speaking of, we need to make sure that these two things are next to each other on the same row in the same line. You can see they're in the same row here. And I'm going to go back to our main nav and actually let's do this above. This is sort of before the site title and all that. So I'm going to say display flex, and then for justify content I'm going to establish space between. Okay, so space between means that it puts the first element all the way to the left, it puts the last element all the way to the right of this container, and then everything else in between is sort of it gets evenly spaced. Right now you can see there's some weirdness going on here, so I'm going to make sure that we align the items to the center, and then that should bring everything down to a midline here. Now we're getting some padding and stuff here. There's space here and here because I didn't do anything with the padding on this site title, or the margin, I'm sorry. There's an automatic margin given to an H1. So if you set the margin to 0, it gets rid of all that, and allows us, what this does is it allows us to style the main nav container. So now we can put any padding that we want on the main nav, and so we get one rem of padding on the top and bottom, and all this is sort of, the margin is zeroed out on all these different elements. This sort of creates more of an outside-in sort of feel to it. And okay, that's pretty good for right now. I told you I would show you how to do this spacing based on, you can see that the spacing is a little wider than one rem here. And what we can do is we can say site title, and we can give site title a flex of 0, 1, and auto. So that means it takes up just enough space for the words. So the space for this element goes from here to here. That's not exactly what we want. We want it to go, let's say, 50%. Okay, so now it's going to take up, at the very least, it's going to take up, or at the very most, it's going to take up 50%. So that means this is going to take up 50% as well. So let's get this off of here. And for our top nav, that's this right here. For our top nav, we're going to say flex, and we can only use the flex because these are children of this. This is a flexed item, or a flex container, and then these two are flex items. So that's where we're putting our flex call here. So the flex property. So we're going to say 1, 0, and you can already see that it's moved. So we're going to make sure that it takes up at least 50% of the space, so you can see that it moved all the way over. So if I undo it, you can see how it moves back over here. But once I set this, that means it's going to flex grow as much as it needs, at least starting at 50%. So it's going to grow to at least 50%. This one is going to shrink, and it'll always have at least 50% of the space. And what I'm going to do with this top nav is I'm going to say I can do another display flex on this navigation, and then I can say justify contents, and we're going to say space between again. Is that going to work? Justify content. And space between. You can see now that they get spaced out evenly, and they're spaced out evenly inside this 50%. So I move this down, you can see that that's what's happening there. They're getting spaced out evenly with this 50%. Okay. So that's one way to control even spacing between the two if you need, if you wanted to take up at least a certain portion of the top, a certain portion of the masthead. Okay, now we're gonna, before we get too far with this text, we're gonna set our masthead inner here, and I'm just gonna set that at a maximum width, and I'm gonna say, put that in there, and we'll say a max width of, I don't know, like 1200 pixels, and we'll say margin of auto. So once we get out, you can see that we're getting a maximum width here. It's not growing past that, you see. So it shrinks whenever it's less than 1200, but once it gets to 1200 pixels, it's not going to go outside that. So we get sort of this containerization of these elements in here. And they didn't do it here. They let this sort of go out, so the max width on this element is a lot wider. But I like that it's nice and pulled together on the inside here. Okay, so that's the site title. You can make this a link if you wanted to make it a link. That's good web practice. I actually want to make it a little bit smaller. So the font size is going to be like 1.5 rem. So you can see up here. The font size is quite small, a little too small for me, so I'm going to make it how I want to make it. And then we need to come through next and do this. Before we get on to that, I want to look at this background. You can see how the background is dark here. I don't think that's the photograph making it dark like that. Either way, we don't have a photograph that's like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to our background image, and I'm just going to undo what we did here. And instead of background and then putting image on the next line, I'm just going to come up here and I'm going to put what's called a linear gradient. This is the easiest way that I've found, just by like easy CSS means, to be able to put an overlay of color on top of any background image. So a linear gradient, you can look it up on Mozilla Developer Network or wherever. What it does is it gives you a linear gradient starting top to bottom, and you can put one color on the top, and then just like any gradient program, you put a separate color at the bottom, and then it gradually moves from one color to the other, filling in the space in between. So if you put the same color on the top and the bottom, you wind up with an even overlay. Okay, and you can even fiddle with this to create different sorts of, like, if it's dark on bottom and top and maybe not as dark in the middle, you can sort of work with that a little bit. But what we need is two values, and so I'm just going to start with RGBA, and then we need a color value, and then we need a transparency value. So I'm going to say 0. We'll just start with 5 and we'll see how that works. So that's like 50% opacity if you worked with these opacities in in CSS. We can either type in a name here. Oh, boy, I really muddled that up. Okay, let's try that again. So we have an RGBA, and then inside that we have our color. So I'm just going to say black, and I'm going to say 0.5, and that's going to be our first color. And this accepts two colors. So if we want the same color across the board, we just copy it and we put it in, and you can see now that it's darker in the background. If we change this color to 0.1, you can see that it's not quite as light. If we change it to 1, it'll be fully opaque. There's no transparency, it's just black. So not what we're looking for. This might be a little dark, so we'll just keep trying it until we get there. That's probably good. This one is quite dark, but some of that is the photo is quite dark. So we'll just leave ours like this. Seems like we can see it pretty well. And then so what we're doing here is we're applying a linear gradient, and then we have a color with a transparency, and then we have another color with a transparency. You can do this any number of ways. If you wanted to do, if you were using linear gradient for real, not as a background color, you wouldn't use a transparency, you would just use two different colors. So let's say red and orange. And then if we get rid of this, you can see that the gradient happens red to orange, right? It starts top to bottom. So you can use red to orange, you can use red to purple to orange. So you can create your own gradients here to use for a background. Not the application that we're doing for today, but just to explain to you what's happening with this background. Alright, so we have our background, we have our top navigation here, and then the next part is this section right here. Before we get to that, let's go ahead and you can see that we're still, you know, this one takes up most of the height of the window and this one does not. So let's just fix that. So our masthead needs to be height, we'll just say 80 viewport height. So you can see that it leaves a little bit of room down here, sort of below the fold kind of thing, where you can see that there's some place to scroll, right? If you wanted to do full coverage, you would say 100% basically of the viewport height, and that would get you all the way from the top to the bottom, left to the right. And let's just leave it at 80. And so now we need to style this. Okay, so what we're doing here is we need to vertically center this entire block. Okay, and the way that we're going to do that is this is going to mess this up, and I'm going to show you how to do this. The way that we're going to do this is we're going to take our masthead inner, our masthead. We're going to flex this and make it a flex container. We're going to center the masthead inner, which should center everything vertically. And because our height is 80 viewport heights, it'll start it at like 40, because that's half. And what we're going to have to do after that is we're going to have to take the main nav, and we're going to have to position it absolutely to the top. So it's going to require a little bit here. But let's just set our display to flex. And you can see now that we've flexed our items to the center. And so we're going to say align items to the center, and you can see that they've sort of just moved down inside of here. That's not what we want. What we want is to move this all back up to the top, and we can use absolute positioning to sort of pull it out of the flow of the website. And in this case, masthead inner needs to be specifically display relative. That way we know what to make this absolutely positioned relative to. So relative to the next higher element, the parent element. And the parent element for this main nav is the masthead inner, so that needs to be set to position relative. And then we can come down to our main nav and we can call this position absolute. and then we're going to make this top 0, and is that right? Let me see here. There we go. I had the relative positioning in the wrong place. Okay, so we needed to position the masthead to be relative. So we want it to be relative not to masthead inner, which stopped right here. We wanted it to bubble all the way up to the very top container. Okay, so that's where I was messing that up. So the position relative needed to be on whatever element you want it to stick to the top of. Okay. And this is we're gonna have to express an explicit width of 100% to make that work again. So we'll do that. And we'll say Alright, so we're running into some weirdnesses here. We'll have to sort of look into that and fix that. I have to restart how that works. Let's go ahead and style this. And this is going to be called masthead text, headline and subheadline. Both of these are going to be white, you can see. So it's going to be a color of white. And then we're going to say subheadline is also going to be a color of white. We want this to not go all the way across the page. Right now it's going all the way across the page, and we want this to only go, let's say, 50% of its container. So one way we can do that is to take our actual container here and set that to max width of 50%. Okay, maybe 60. Okay. And we're going to need to change our styling here. So for our headline, we want to say text transform of uppercase. And we want to change the font size. Right now it's in H2. So it's just taking on the H2 styles for whatever the browser has. And we're going to call this something like 3rem, which looks a little bit closer. This feels a little bit too loose for me, is how we describe that with the type. And so we call the line height, we'll just start with 1 and we'll work our way back. That looks okay. So it's a little bit closer together. It feels like this all goes together and it's not two lines. The trick to this is if you start to see the space in between and you don't see them grouped together anymore, then that's like you've gone too far with your line height. Line height is the same as leading if you're a designer. We're getting a funky margin here, and we need to either take the margin off of this, which I am going to do, or we need to take the margin off of the bottom. If you take it off of this, then you're going to get a little bit more even spacing because this P has margin at the top and the bottom already. So you sort of get the right look and feel. We're going to put a little bit more margin maybe on the bottom here, or margin on top of this button. Doesn't really matter. You sort of 6 1/2 dozen really. So we come down to our button. Actually, I don't like the line height on this subhead line, so I'm going to say a line height of 1.5. So that's a little bit better to me. It felt a little too close. But now you can see that this is 1 unit, this is 1 unit, and then this is a unit. So let's go to our button, and we're going to say background is going to be lime green, and the color is going to be white. The border is going to be 0, and then we're going to just apply some padding. We'll say 1 rem to get us started, and then it does have some rounded corners here, so we're going to put some rounded corners on this by saying border radius of like 10 pixels. That's a little much, so maybe 7. And dial it back a little bit. They're rounded, but they're not quite that rounded. And so now we have, I don't know what color that is. Could always see, I guess. So this is the color for that block. And we'll just add that color in so that it looks a little bit better. You can see we're getting the same color. It's a little bit more, it's a little less pop in your face, right? And at this point we can sort of look at our design. We got something going on up here we'll just have to take a look at. Might have to use our original trick without the flex. Where's it at? So let's try 0, 1. See if that helps us. That does not help. So when you look at it here, we've got a problem up here because this element is going way off the page. So we need to just inspect that and figure out what's going on. It's this element that's the problem. When we do a width of 100%, so if we bring that down to something like 75%, then that gets us where we need to be. Sorry. And then we can look at that here, and it might just have to be something where we add we would have to do something a little bit different with this if we were going to make it responsive anyway. Still sort of getting the weirdness there. So let's just say this is not there. What happens? And this is not there. So then we need this main nav element to be a maximum width of 75%. We needed this to be flex. Yeah, that's definitely getting us to the wrong place, isn't it? So maybe we'll just have to set an absolute width on this, and we'll just say 800 pixels. And we'll just have to do our best. Maybe we'd have to just make that change. We'd have to make that change at certain breakpoints. So once we get to and let's say we get to a minimum width of 1200 pixels, then we'll add that width. We'll make that 1200, and otherwise it's going to be 100%. So really it should be problem comes in like right there, like 1000. Yeah, we're getting some sort of weirdnesses here. Huh. Maybe one way that we could solve that would be by going here and changing our percentages here. So if this only takes up 40 and this one takes 60, maybe that will help. Nope, it doesn't help at all. Okay, well, it's a little weirdness that we'd have to try to figure out and live with in the end. One thing that bothers me as a designer is I can see here that this is not lined up. So that might be fine up here. But what we can do is we can put our, we had originally put our padding where? We put padding here on our main nav. Instead of putting padding on the main nav, we can actually put it on our masthead inner. And that should push everything over. Maybe the padding is what's bothering. Yeah, that seems to be one of the problems. Yeah, just getting some weirdness up here in this element. So, and then we're also going to need to not totally remove the padding here, but we'll just say padding of 1 rem on the top and bottom, and then nothing on the side. So we get our vertical padding, but nothing. But this is all nice and clean and lined up here. So that now when we look at, let's take this off. So when we look here, now we get our nicely designed home page. Maybe this is a little bit too busy for you. If it is, then you can come back in here and you can just change these values. So if you wanted to go to something a little bit darker, you could do that. If it's just getting too busy in the background for you, you can see how you can really change and make these things pop out a little bit more. Right now this is more of a geometric type of design, so it's not quite as important to be able to see that in the background. And again, the one thing bugging me is this space here. So let's just go into the button, and we're going to make our button to display inline block. And what that does is it allows us to use the block elements with our button, like margin and padding. So essentially this button is stretching 100% of its container, but it's only going as far as its content, as far as we told it. If it were just a block level button, well, I guess we get the same thing, maybe because it's a button. So if we display block and then we say margin top of 2 rem, then we get a little bit more spacing there. Let's also fix this button up a little bit. That's a little bit bigger. That's too much. We can maybe push it to the side a little bit more. You can see that this button here is a little bit flatter and wider. So we'll leave that that way. And when we look at it here, you can see it makes just a little bit of difference because you're sort of separating out the elements. So you can tell that this all is one element, and then this button is also one element. So we have our, we could style these links. We could style this to be a link as well. But essentially, we've reproduced this design. This goes down a little bit farther, so you can make this even farther down by going to our masthead and then controlling the height of the masthead, let's say to 90. That'll give you more of the picture, and it also pushes everything down the page a little bit more. And you're getting a similar sort of look and feel here. Alright, so that's how you would do that. And if you have more content down the page and you started scrolling, this all would go together up the page. It would not get stuck. But you could just as easily take your main nav element and make that sticky to the top of your page, or once it starts scrolling, you can see that there's you get this nice little menu here with the background. So you can make that happen with JavaScript and just adding or subtracting a class that has a class of, let's say, it would be called active menu or something like that. And so you would set the styles for the main nav when the active menu class is applied to it, and then it would show those styles. So then you would have a background that is equal to the button color. And then once this has active class on it, is it called active menu? Yeah. We have to say and active menu. So then you can sort of change the styles out here by adding or subtracting this active menu class. So when we take it off, then it goes back, and then you can control the adding or removing of that class to this particular element. You can control the adding or removing of this through a scroll. That would be your trigger. So as the user scrolls down the page, if they get to this part of the page, add this class. Otherwise, remove the class, and then that's how you get this sort of nice animation. You get this nice bringing those two things together. So, alright, so that is our very stylish header. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them down in the section below, in the comments section. I'll get to them as quickly as I possibly can. If you have any suggestions or would like to see anything particular in videos coming up, just leave those down in the comments also. I'm trying to give sort of things that you can put into practice today, so you could actually go out and you could build this as an element at the beginning of a landing page or at the top of a website that you're working on even today. So hopefully that gives you some of the elements as I look through landing page designs, as I look through other website designs. I want to see what are the common elements that are being put out there and give you the power to be able to go out and to really market yourself by saying, hey, I can make this sort of website for you if that's the look that you're looking for. And honestly, it's not particularly difficult. New tools are making it way easier to do these things than ever before. There are probably even easier ways to do this with CSS Grid, but I just wanted to show you with the Flexbox how to make these things work. Alright, please subscribe if you haven't subscribed. I try to put out a video a week or so. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, sometimes it does. And you can check out the other videos that I have on my YouTube channel for Flexbox or CSS Grid, or doing some different things with those newer technologies and how we can up our design game. as developers. Alright, well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.